This meeting of the Board of Education for September 10th? Nope. Wow, that was a rough start. Okay. The 20th. This board meeting of the Board of Education for September 23rd is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on this evening has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Tonight, Chair Constam and Student Representative Luttrell are both absent this evening. So tonight, we're going to begin the evening by consideration of a proclamation on the celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month. Following the superintendent's report and public comment, we'll get an overview of the 2019-20 budget calendar and the Student Success Act, and we'll have an opportunity to hear about the spring 2019 Smarter Balanced results. Following the board meeting, we'll move to the Mazama Conference Room for a work session on both our board goals and the internal performance audit function. Chair Bailey, would you by any chance be ready now, or do you want?
Chair Bailey, Director.
Or do you want to?
No, but if you hum a few bars, I'll take it. Sure. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to remind you that this November, we'll be asking voters to renew the local option property tax levy. What we're asking, this levy is for 5 years. We're now in the last year of it. It brings in roughly about $90 million a year for us. It goes straight to the classroom. So this past year, it's funded roughly a third of our teachers. And I've got a few examples. For example, last year it funded 8 teachers at Abernathy, at Bridle Mile, and at Chapman, about 5 at James John, and roughly a third all the way across the district. A couple of things. Expenditures of the levy are monitored by our Citizens Budget Review Committee, and they have consistently said, yes, the money goes exactly into the classroom like it's supposed to. We're asking for the tax rate to remain exactly where it is, so it will not be an increase in the tax rate. This is a big deal. It's a huge, substantial piece of our budget, and again, so important to funding our teachers in the classroom. So, vote yes, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Bailey. So tonight, in recognition of Hispanic Heritage Month, we'll vote on a resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month. I'd like to ask Jonathan Garcia, our Chief Engagement Officer, to read this resolution for our consideration.
Para los que están escuchando en español, vamos a leer una proclamación importante para reconocer este mes como una celebración de nuestras herencias latinas.
Resolución número 5967. Resolución que proclama la celebración del Mes de la Herencia Hispana Nacional en escuelas públicas de Portland. Y que quede considerado que la Semana de la Herencia Hispana, que comenzó en 1968 bajo el presidente Lyndon Johnson y fue expandido por el presidente Ronald Reagan a ser el Mes de la Herencia Hispana, y se convirtió en ley en 1988 para cubrir un periodo de 30 días, a partir del 15 de septiembre, que representa el aniversario de la independencia de 5 países latinoamericanos, y que quede considerado que los hispanos y latinos han enriquecido y formado positivamente nuestra comunidad, desde aquellos cuyas raíces que se remontan hacia generaciones a aquellos que han llegado recientemente a buscar la promesa de los Estados Unidos. Ellos representan el espíritu nuestro del sueño americano, que con el trabajo duro y estudios uno puede construir una mejor vida para uno mismo y un mejor futuro para sus hijos. Y que quede considerado que los hispanos y latinos hacen importantes contribuciones y continúan avanzando en las enseñanzas, medicina, arte, cultura y el servicio público, y han sido una influencia constante y vital en el crecimiento y la prosperidad de nuestra comunidad, y que quede considerado que más del 16 de los alumnos matriculados en las escuelas públicas de Portland son hispanos o latinos, y que quede considerado que más del 8% de nuestros empleados son hispanos o latinos, y ellos contribuyen a lograr la misión de Portland Public Schools en cada nivel dentro de cada departamento y división del distrito. Y que quede considerado que nuestras escuelas honran y preservan los bienes lingüísticos y culturales de los estudiantes a través de clubes estudiantiles como MECHA y programas de enriquecimiento como nuestros cursos de inmersión lingüística en 2 idiomas, estudios étnicos, teoría crítica de las razas y la opción de obtener un sello de 2 idiomas al graduarse en cual honra a nuestros alumnos que hablan español como un idioma de herencia, a la vez exponiendo a los que no hablan español a las diversas perspectivas multilingües y multiculturales. Y que quede considerado, this is one of those hard words, que nuestro distrito y nuestra comunidad se fortalecen en el apoyo y la abogacía de organizaciones como Latino Network, Hacienda CDC, la Cámara Hispana Metropolitana, Verde, el Teatro Milagro y el Programa Hispano, y que quede considerado que reconocemos que cuando elevamos a los estudiantes hispanos y latinos, al personal, a las familias y a los miembros de la comunidad, fortalecemos a todo nuestro distrito, cuando creamos más caminos hacia la oportunidad educativa, proporcionando la oportunidad para todos los estudiantes a alcanzar su mayor potencial. Y que quede considerado que entender, reconocer y promover los aportes de nuestros estudiantes, personal, familias y comunidades hispanas y latinas es una parte importante de la celebración del mes de la herencia hispana, y que quede considerado que el valor fundamental de la equidad racial y justicia social de las escuelas públicas de Portland es creer en el derecho fundamental a la dignidad humana y a que generar un mundo equitativo requiere un sistema educativo que interrumpa intencionalmente y que construya líderes para interrumpir los sistemas de opresión. Y que quede considerado que las escuelas públicas de Portland, reimaginadas, la visión de nuestro distrito y su estrella del norte, articula un retrato de un ex alumno de las escuelas públicas de Portland como un pensador crítico, compasivo, capaz de colaborar y resolver problemas y preparar para liderar un mundo socialmente más justo. Los alumnos serán líderes de equidad transformacional. Los educadores se centrarán en la equidad racial y la justicia social, y el distrito escolar promoverá a sistemas y estructuras alineadas en la equidad racial. Y que quede considerado que las escuelas públicas de Portland tienen una política de equidad racial que establece nuestro compromiso de superar afirmativamente las barreras educativas que han resultado en una brecha persistente e inaceptable para los estudiantes de color, y dar a cada estudiante la oportunidad y el apoyo para alcanzar su máximo potencial. Y que quede considerado que cerrar las brechas de oportunidades mientras elevamos el rendimiento de todos los estudiantes es la prioridad principal de la Junta Escolar, de la mesa directiva, del superintendente y todo el personal del distrito. Y que quede considerado que la Junta Escolar, la mesa directiva de las escuelas públicas de Portland, cree que cada estudiante debe ser celebrado y apreciado por las contribuciones distintas y vibrantes que hacen el compartir idioma, culturas, ideas, creencias y valores dentro de la comunidad escolar. Se resuelve que la mesa directiva de las escuelas públicas de Portland, por lo presente, promueve el 15 de septiembre al 15 de octubre como el mes de herencia hispana y alienta a los miembros del personal, alumnos y a la comunidad a observar, reconocer y celebrar la cultura, herencia y contribuciones económicas de los hispanos y latinos en Portland y a los Estados Unidos a través de las actividades culturalmente relevantes, y aprender del pasado y entender las experiencias que han formado los Estados Unidos. Y se resuelve que el superintendente o su designado trabajará con todas las escuelas del distrito para reconocer el mes de la herencia hispana a través de lecciones y actividades culturalmente relevantes.
Gracias. Director Lowry, would you like the complimentary?
I will now read the same proclamation that Mr. Garcia just read for us in English. Resolution number 5967, resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. Hispanic Heritage Week, which began in 1968 under President Lyndon Johnson, was expanded to National Hispanic Heritage Month by President Ronald Reagan and enacted into law in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting on September 15th, the day that represents the anniversary of independence for 5 Latin American countries. Hispanics and Latinos have enriched and positively shaped our community. From those whose roots trace back generations to those who have recently arrived to pursue the promise of the United States, they represent the spirit of our American dream. With hard work and an education, you can build a better life for yourself and a better future for your children. Hispanics and Latinos make profound contributions and continue to make advances in education, medicine, art, culture, and public service, and have been a consistent and vital influence in our community's growth and prosperity. More than 16% of enrolled students in the Portland Public Schools are Hispanic and/or Latino. Hispanics and/or Latinos comprise over 8% of our employees and contribute to the accomplishment of PPS's mission at every level within every department and division of the district. Our schools honor and preserve the linguistic and cultural assets of students through student clubs like Micha and environmental programs such as our dual language immersion, ethnic studies, critical race theory courses, and the option to obtain a seal of biliteracy upon graduation that honor and enrich the diverse backgrounds of our heritage Spanish speakers, while exposing non-Spanish speakers to diverse multilingual and multicultural perspectives. Our district and our community is strengthened by the support and advocacy of organizations like Latino Network, Hacienda CDC, the Hispanic Metropolitan Chamber, Verde, Milagro Theater, and El Programa Hispano. We recognize that when we lift up Hispanic Latino students, staff, families, and community members, we strengthen our entire district. When we create more pathways to educational opportunity, we provide the chance for all students to reach their greatest potential. Understanding, recognizing, and promoting the assets of our Hispanic and Latino students, staff, families, and community is an important part of celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. Portland Public Schools' core value of racial equity and social justice is that we believe in the fundamental right to human dignity and that generating an equitable world requires an educational system that intentionally disrupts and build leaders to disrupt systems of oppression. Portland Public Schools reimagined our district's vision and North Star, articulates a portrait of a graduate of Portland Public Schools as a compassionate, critical thinker, able to collaborate and solve problems, and prepared to lead a more socially just world. Graduates will be transformational equity leaders. Educators will be racial equity and social justice centered, and the school district will advance racial equity-aligned systems and structures. Portland Public Schools has a racial education equity policy that states our commitment to affirmatively overcome the educational barriers that have resulted in a persistent, unacceptable gap for students of color, and to give each student the opportunity and support to meet his or her highest potential. Closing opportunity gaps while raising achievement for all students is the top priority of the Board of Education, the superintendent, and all the district staff. And the Portland Public Schools Board of Education believes each and every student is to be celebrated and appreciated for the distinct and vibrant contributions made by sharing cultures, language, ideas, beliefs, and values within a school community. So, resolved. Do I read this next part, Director Remoters? The Portland Public Schools Board of Education hereby promotes September 15th through October 15th as Hispanic Heritage Month and encourages staff, students, and community to observe, recognize, and celebrate the culture, heritage, and economic contributions of Hispanics and Latinos to Portland, Oregon, and the United States through culturally relevant activity, and to learn from the past and understand the experiences that have shaped the United States. The superintendent or his designee shall work with all schools in the district to recognize Hispanic Heritage Month through culturally relevant lessons and activities.
Thank you. The board will now vote on resolution number 5967, resolution proclaiming the celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month in Portland Public Schools. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Director Bailey, seconded by Director Moore. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any citizen comment on resolution 5967?
No.
Is there any board discussion? Okay, the board will now vote on resolution 5967. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? Resolution 5967 is approved by a vote of 6-0. Thank you, board members, and thank you, Mr. Garcia and Director Lowry as well. Look forward to the celebrations for the rest of the month. Next up, we will have the superintendent's report.
Good evening, directors and our present and listening audience. Buenas tardes. While we didn't bring out the mariachi and the student folklorico groups, they were actually out in full force this past Sunday, the 15th, at the annual El Grito de Independencia. So it was a great time to be able to be there with hundreds of our community members, many of our families and students. I was honored to be invited to speak on stage late that night, recognizing the importance of Latino traditions, history, and customs. And I know that this is going to be a month-long recognition, so I look forward to continuing to visit our schools, acknowledging this Hispanic Heritage Month. Well, it's hard to believe we're in our 5th week of the school year now, but indeed that's the case. Back-to-school nights are taking place. Our fall season sports are in full swing. I've been making the rounds at many of our student athletics department activities, and students across the district already are asserting themselves as leaders within school communities and in the wider world around them. And that's going to be the focus of my report. But before I talk about our student leadership, I want to talk also about a couple of important senior leadership announcements, as is tradition here in Portland Public Schools. As we've hit our full stride here in this new school year, we're welcoming a new member of our leadership team, Dr. Esther Amabayan, who will be serving as regional superintendent for the Cleveland Wilson Franklin Grant K-8 schools cohort. That includes a total of 40 schools. Dr. Amabayan joins Dr. Keely Simpson and Joe LaFontaine as we complete our 3 regional superintendent team. She comes to us from the Roosevelt School District in Phoenix, Arizona, where she served as that district's chief academic officer. She has also served in leadership roles in the Houston Independent School District and with the San Diego Unified School District, where she served for 22 years, working her way up as a classroom teacher. As is tradition, I'd love to invite her to come up and introduce herself to the Board of Education directors. One question I always like to ask in our final interviews is, what drew you and attracted you to the transformative work here in the Portland Public Schools?
Good evening. I am Esther Laway, Regional Superintendent for one of the areas in Portland Public Schools. I did come from Arizona as a Chief Academic Officer. I have been in education for about 30 years.
Do you mind using the microphone? Thank you.
That way,
Tell 'em
everybody in
that
the
used to-
TV audience can hear you.
Okay.
Those who are watching at home can also hear your
Oh, all right.
comments.
I'll start over. I am Esther Maway. I'm a regional superintendent over the Franklin Wilson, Grant, and Cleveland school clusters. I do come from Arizona as a chief academic officer. That was my last role. I have also been in Houston as a Chief School Support Officer over there, and prior to that, I was in San Diego Unified School District. I chose to come to Portland because I look for districts that are trying to do the best work for children in service of student academic achievement and equity and racial justice themes. So that's how Portland Public Schools came to be a choice for me. I applied and I got the job, and I'm excited to be here. This is my 5th day on the job, so nice to meet you. No one's counting though. So thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you here, Esther. As we've continued to build our team, we're always looking for talent out there who really has done exemplary work in supporting school communities. Part of my reorganization at the cabinet level is to include these 3 new regional superintendents around the table so that we can be best responsive to the real-time needs of our school community. So again, welcome to the PPS team. All right, so I opened by mentioning that this school year has started with students already asserting themselves as leaders in our community, and a very visible example of this was last week's global climate strike. You might have heard about it. We estimate over 6,000 PPS students took part in this event this past Friday. The Portland event was part of a worldwide effort. It was the culmination of a great deal of planning by the young people here, and most notably by our own high school students. We recognize students' constitutional rights to freedom of expression, and climate science activities align with our board's climate justice resolution. It aligns with our core curriculum, and it aligns perfectly with our district's vision of a graduate profiles. When it comes to our curriculum, our students continue to hold us accountable for making sure that we continue developing this important work. Thanks to the groundbreaking board resolution and advocacy by our students, climate science is a growing part of our core curriculum. And just last week, we announced the hiring of Nicole Berg, our new programs manager for climate change and climate justice. Portland Public Schools is the first and only school district in the country that we're aware of to include this type of role. And we are very pleased to have Nicole also joining our team here, and look forward to her leadership in advancing this work moving forward. In her new role, Nicole will facilitate creating curriculum to embed this important topic into K-12 science and social studies instructional units, and will help coordinate the inclusion of student and community voices, including especially frontline voices of students of color, into the process. She'll also be collaborating with the Office of Partnerships and Engagement to support students as they facilitate quarterly meetings of a diverse and student-led climate justice advocacy group. So Nicole Berg is actually here this evening. It's her first day on the job, and I'd also like to invite her up to introduce herself to the board and to the community as well.
Friday, so forgive me if I'm a little disoriented here. Buenas tardes, me llamo Nicole Berg y soy la nueva directora de programas de cambio climático y justicia climática aquí en las escuelas públicas de Portland. Good evening, I'm Nicole Berg, and like we said, I have a very long job title. I'd really like to begin by thanking the students of PPS for your vision, leadership, and bravery in challenging our education system and holding us all accountable for creating the learning opportunities you deserve. You have created a path for other students across the United States and the world to advocate for climate justice and climate science in schools, and for that, I really commend you. Thank you also to the board, the climate justice team, and district leadership, teachers, community advocates, and families for your commitment to the futures of our young people by advocating for and passing Resolution 5272. I am honored to have been selected to help move this work forward, and am committed to doing my part to ensure that all graduates of PPS will be compassionate, critical thinkers, able to collaborate and solve problems, and be prepared to lead a more socially just world. A little bit about me. My background in justice-oriented education comes from my personal experience growing up as a white presenting Latina in Madison, Wisconsin. This positionality allowed me the privilege of observing firsthand the ways in which our schools serve to empower certain groups of students at the expense of others. Academically, I experienced Eurocentric social studies curriculum and Spanish language classes that failed to embrace the multitude of dialects and cultural norms of speakers outside of Spain. And socially, I watched my Latinx friends and family members deal with microaggressions and stereotyping and saw the destructive impact of teachers' lowered expectations on their sense of self and optimism for the future. Thus, I dedicated my life to empowering other Latinx people through education, and this quickly expanded to include all people of historically marginalized communities. I became passionate about climate change and climate justice as topics of study as a result of multiple grant-funded professional learning travel experiences that culminated with my participating in the Grosvenor Teacher Fellowship Program through National Geographic. In 2014, I traveled to Antarctica to learn about our changing climate and the impact that humans have on this polar ecosystem. And this experience inspired me to embed climate change and polar studies into the curriculum in my home district of Madison Metropolitan School District. Without centralized support, though, this work was sporadic, and while we were able to do amazing things in individual classrooms, students' access to these lessons actually really just depended on which teacher they had. That is why the role of the Climate Change, Climate Justice Programs Manager is so critical. I'm excited to create a systematic approach to ensure that all students in PPS have access to climate change and climate justice lessons that fully prepare them to become our future leaders, educators, and innovators. And I'm especially excited to work with our student leaders, frontline communities, and climate justice team to ensure that we are elevating the voices of those most disproportionately impacted by our rapidly changing climate and creating the conditions for all communities to thrive. It's truly a team effort, and I look forward to meeting all of you and to our work together. Thank you.
Welcome.
Bienvenida a las Escuelas Públicas de Portland. So our vision, developed last year through many conversations with thousands of PPS stakeholders, says that PPS graduates will be influential and informed global stewards. It reads, as global change agents, they are responsible stewards of the environment and knowledgeable about climate justice issues. Our role as a district is to provide opportunities and supports for students to realize their highest potential, including their potential to be global stewards. Sometimes that means helping students navigate those opportunities. I'd like to thank our community engagement team for the many thoughtful discussions with the Climate Strike student leaders, with whom we have been profoundly impressed regarding their efforts throughout this process. I'm also grateful for every group here who played a role in supporting our students and in our district process leading up to last Friday. This truly was a multi-department effort that includes our Office of School Performance, Operations, School Security, Human Resources, and many others. And I'd like to particularly thank our school administrators and staff, many of whom helped last week go very smoothly and safely downtown, and to our educators who provided developmentally appropriate climate change awareness learning activities to students in classrooms. Our students are capable of truly great things. With the right educational environment, they have the potential to do things that they themselves might find even unfathomable. Most importantly, they can become part of something much bigger than themselves or their individual schools. What we can do, all of us, is support, encourage, mentor, communicate, provide opportunities, and sometimes get out of the way. I feel like we did a little bit of all of those things the last few weeks, and what we saw last Friday was a remarkable reminder of the great power of our youth. PPS students will change the world for the better. As I mentioned during a brief radio interview on Friday, we say that we want our students to be critical thinkers, to reflect on real-world issues, and to exercise a growing sense of agency and advocacy. I can't think of a better example than the action our students took last week. I'm proud to be their superintendent. That concludes my remarks this night. Thank you, directors.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero, and welcome to our new leaders here. So next we're going to have student and public comment. And before we begin the public comment period, I'd like to review our guidelines for public comment. The board thanks the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments to the board. We value public input as it informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen without distraction from electronic devices. One quick reminder, any oversized signs, I don't see any, so we should be fine. Board members and superintendents will not respond to comments or questions during public comment, but our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. Complaints about individual employees should be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you'd like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you give them to Ms. Powell or Ms. Bradshaw to distribute to us. Presenters will have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of your testimony, a green light will go on. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will go on, and when your time is up, a red light will go on and a buzzer will sound. We respectfully ask that you conclude your comments at that time. So with that, we appreciate in advance everybody's input and thank you for your cooperation. We're going to start with this. And this fits perfectly with just the end of the superintendent's report. We have 2 climate strike student leaders, I believe, here. Jaden Nguyen, a junior at Wilson, and Ella Schreiner, a senior at Grant. Are you Jaden or Ella?
Jaden was not actually able to join us tonight, but
Okay.
I just wanted to give a quick statement about the strike from a student perspective and start by saying that it was an incredible day and truly inspiring to see all of my peers joining us out there. As a student leader of the strike, I want to start by thanking all of you also for your support and to acknowledge that districts across the region and even the nation were looking to our demands and the district's response for inspiration for how they could also contribute to this process. I'll start with a quick overview of the day itself. There was a rally at Terry Shrunk Plaza, and that was filled completely with students, and the streets surrounding were also filled. We had speakers from Roosevelt's Pacific Climate Warriors group, as well as students from Jefferson, Grant, Cleveland, and Wilson. And it was just very inspiring and exciting to see high schoolers arriving with their fellow students from schools as they arrived in their groups. And Roosevelt had a Roosevelt flag hanging in the audience, and that was just a fun environment. The crowd was very respectful to all of our speakers, and I think that everyone was able to learn a little bit from the other people that were there. We then marched to the East Bank Esplanade, and their estimates say that there were 20,000 people there, so there was a lot of community support. One of my favorite moments was while we were on the bridge, there were swimmers in the water and kayakers that had signs that say, "We're with the kids, and we fight for climate justice alongside you." The festival was also amazing. There were educational opportunities there. Students were able to do art projects and engage with students from other schools, as well as sign up to get involved with organizations across Portland. In terms of PPS's role in the event, it's very appropriate, and we thank you for honoring the intent of the Climate Justice Resolution, Resolution 5272. It was a complicated process with lots of communication, and we were able to achieve the goals. I would like to highlight the fact that the process was a little slow in terms of getting communication out there and getting clear response from all schools. We were trying to avoid having inequities and confusion in schools, and there were a few scenarios where volleyball athletes at Cleveland were told that they would be benched if they participated. The Grant attendance line said absences related to protests and march would be unexcused. And there were some misunderstandings at Roosevelt that led students to believe they needed several forms signed by parents. Luckily, Shanice Clark and Jonathan Garcia and our ongoing connections with the district were able to do masterful jobs of addressing and remedying these issues, so we're grateful for that. I think it's clear to all of us that communication to teachers, administration, and coaches would have prevented some of these confusions if they had been given a little bit earlier. Our biggest concern was with the lack of communication directly with teachers. The communication went out to administrators and later teachers, but only 2 days before the march, and I think that the administrative teams were expected to pass that down to their teaching teams, and that was a slow process. So overall, it was very empowering, and I'm so grateful to the district's support and all the engagement, and I think we have some great learning points to continue working forward. And I look forward to our continued connection. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
But thank you for your leadership.
Yeah.
I think it was a masterful day of students really speaking out and being leaders in our community. So thanks. Ms. Bradshaw, who else do we have for public comment?
We have Heidi Hacker and Sherry Bates for public comment.
Good evening. My name is Heidi Hacker. It's Hacker. I am a parent of 2 students at Forest Park Elementary School, and I'm also a part of the safety committee at our school. And I'm here tonight on behalf of the Forest Park Elementary School community of concerned parents, staff, and multiple committees. We would like to address safety concerns with our school's portable classrooms, as well as our excessive reliance on these portable classes, and also the portable class sizes. Ultimately, we are here tonight to request funding within the next projected school improvement bond to remove the portables and construct the second school wing that was planned upon enrollment expansion in the school's initial design. Our school opened its doors in 1998, and it was sized to hold a maximum of 300 students. Within the first few years, Forest Park Elementary already outgrew its space, and our first portable was donated as used, and it was only meant to be a temporary solution to the growing class sizes. Currently, we have 5 portables housing 10 classrooms, some of which are over 30 years old. Forest Park Elementary School has the most portables in the entire Portland Public School District, the majority of schools having only 1 or 2 portables. At Forest Park Elementary, students in grades 3rd, 4th, and 5th are in these portable classrooms all day, every day. That's half of our student body. The maximum number of students per classroom is determined by traditional classroom sizes, not portable class sizes, which are remarkably smaller. This year we lost 3 teachers due to cutbacks, resulting in even larger class sizes in portables. A larger number of students in a smaller classroom footprint and a lack of adequate ventilation causes CO2 levels in the portables to run very high. Recommended CO2 levels range from 350 to 1,000 parts per million. Last year, these levels were tracked by teachers in the portables who found that by 9 a.m., our CO2 levels had already reached 1,000 parts per million. So they had no choice but to open the windows, and found that if the windows were left open all day, the levels hovered around 900 parts per million. Now, by opening these windows, we are inviting in the elements. There were days when the windows were left open during a heat wave. Alternatively, there were days the windows were left open all day and temperatures were near freezing. But the teachers had no choice because high levels of CO2 can lead to drowsiness and inability to concentrate and headaches. And some of these symptoms were mentioned by students in these portables. These are 8, 9, and 10-year-olds just going to school. And this year, we have a greater number of students in each classroom. So the teachers have been tracking CO2 levels and have found that they are now reaching higher levels, 1,600 by mid-morning. So we are asking, please, that something be done. We're just looking for fair and equitable classrooms for all of our students, not just those in grades kinder through 2nd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sherry Bates, and I'm a parent of a student at Forest Park Elementary, also part of the safety committee at our school, and here tonight on behalf of the community of concerned parents. I'd also like to address some additional safety concerns with our school portable classrooms. Number 1, these portables do not have restrooms, nor running water. This is not only a hygiene issue, but also impacts the teaching activities and causes classroom disruptions. Number 2, there are seismic issues. These portables do not have permanent foundations and are susceptible to differential settlement, resulting in cracks, sticking doors, and inoperable windows at times. Drainage and climate also create issues of moisture, pest, and potential mold infiltration. Number 3, these portables create exterior unsupervised corridors. Currently, there is limited visibility and lack of security as the children go from portables to the main building. Just a few weeks ago, there was an armed man not far from our neighborhood, and Bunny Slope Elementary School went on lockout. This was not targeted at their school, but it was a necessary precaution to lock out the school. This was another reminder of the vulnerability of our children in portable classrooms. Number 4, I'd like to also address the lockdown and lockout scenarios. They are unique to every school. At Forest Park Elementary, half of our students are being taught in portables, which is similar to being on lockout every day, all day. There are some additional teacher concerns that were reported. Disruptions to classes because of thin walls. The door passes that the children carry are not secure and they can be lost or taken. Their secondary egress windows are unstable due to height above grade. Communication can be non-existent with loss of power, and cell service can be poor in our area, creating a potential feeling of isolation during an emergency. Our ultimate goal is to see the portables removed and the second wing constructed, as was referenced in the original school design. In 1998, the district committed to expanding Forest Park Elementary if enrollment grew as it was expected to. As reported in the Oregonian, that means the second phase of construction, not funded through the 1995 bond issue, to house an additional 200 more students. It is time to improve the safety and security of our children at Forest Park Elementary. We are asking to be added to the 2020 school improvement bond. Thank you.
Thank you. The district and the board will be working on a bond package this year, and we have your materials, so thank you for submitting that. And I should note that Director Scott is the chair of the Bond School Improvement Committee, the committee that will be taking the lead on behalf of the board on the bond package. So thank you. Any
We
other
have-
public comment?
Yes, one more. Matt Marjanovic, sorry.
It's good. Hi, I'm Matt Marjanovic, M-A-R-J-A-N-O-V-I-C, and I'm a parent of 2 PPS students. However, some folks here and in our home viewing audience may remember me from my role as co-creator of the Soft Neighborhood Model for School Assignment, which was first presented here nearly 4 years ago in October of 2015. That was during the earlier DBRAC era of enrollment balancing, and this January we entered a new era, the flow analytics era. I don't expect the flow outcomes to be substantially different from the DBRAC outcomes. Both processes are structured to preserve the status quo, and the status quo is a system that fundamentally cannot achieve stable, balanced enrollments. The status quo is also a system that fundamentally reinforces the educational disparities in this district. Nonetheless, the show must go on, and we all have our roles to play in this new season of enrollment balancing theater. My role tonight is to ask some questions about the scope, schedule, and cost of the flow analytics project. On January 22nd, the board approved a contract for $300,000 for a first year of work. That contract stipulates completion of the first deliverable, an enrollment capacity and program analysis report, by July of 2019, followed by initial school boundary scenarios and a public engagement plan in August. As far as I can tell, none of these have been delivered yet. In fact, a June 3rd article in the district's Pulse newsletter stated that the first deliverable, the enrollment capacity and program analysis report, would not be presented to the board until sometime this fall. Given that we're at the end of September now, which is 8 months into a 12-month contract, and this is the last board meeting of September, the original contract schedule has already slipped at least 2 months. So my questions to the board are, how much has the schedule slipped? If new deadlines have been established, what are they, and is the board okay with them? Why has the schedule slipped? How much slip is due to underestimation by flow? How much slip is due to flow waiting for input from PPS or other parties? Will the schedule continue to slip? Will this process meet the known hard deadlines, such as the reopening of Kellogg Middle School? Will the schedule slip reduce the time available for public involvement? Has the contract scope changed? Is Flow still intending to produce all the deliverables which the board is expecting? Has the budget slipped? How much of the original scope will be completed within the $300,000 budget? And how much has slipped into the realm of contract renewals? Finally, what is the overall budget expectation? How much cash is expected to Flow, and over how many years? I look forward to hearing these questions asked and answered by this board in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, very helpful. Ms. Bradshaw, anything? That's it. Thank you, everybody who came and participated in public comment tonight, helping inform our decision-making. So at this time, the board will vote on the business agenda. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the business agenda? Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda? It's been moved by Director Scott and seconded by Director Bailey. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on the business agenda? Is there any board discussion on the business agenda? So I just have one note that I want to thank the staff that participated in the process of reworking the summaries of our contracts for those that impact student outcomes. That was something that the board had asked for in September, and we received a set of revised summaries, which I think really will help the board as it looks at the contracts and the impacts on students and help us continue to look at ways in which we can most effectively support our students through the contracting process. So thanks to the staff for that. There's no board discussion. If not, we'll now vote on resolutions 5965 and 5966 in the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The business agenda is approved by a 6-0 vote.
I just want to second your comment on the contract formats. They're really helpful.
And those should all be, if they're not already, be posted online so the community can have the benefit of the staff analysis as well. Next, I'd like to, we're going to have a presentation on the smaller balanced assessment results. I'd like to ask the superintendent to introduce the item.
We're continuing this evening with the onboarding process of Dr. Russell Brown, who's going to lead our discussion on our assessment outcomes for this past school year. So welcome back to the podium there, Dr. Brown.
Good evening, Vice Chair Brim Edwards, members of the board and the community, Superintendent Guerrero. Pleased to join you again this evening to, and I'm looking for a device. Pleased again to be joining the board this evening and the community to talk about the assessment results. Going to talk about not just Smarter Balance, but also some of the things that we learned from the pilot of NWA last year and how we can use those two assessments in conjunction with one another to inform how we think about both growth and achievement for our students. You know, as we heard tonight, we have a commitment to close achievement gaps over time. And in order to do that, then we need to leverage all the tools available to us to do so. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about both those assessments and how they fit together, with NWA really providing a lovely progress monitoring tool for us that helps us monitor not just achievement but growth for students within an academic year and across academic years. And then we'll look at the relationship between that tool and the Smarter Balance results, which is our summative assessment, which are used for state and federal accountability. And I will refer back and forth to this illustration from time to time to talk about what I consider to be the ideal. That is, if we accelerate growth for students over time, then we begin to close achievement gaps. And if that pattern is continued over time, then we'll be able to see the vision that we've talked about where we're closing achievement gaps for students and raising achievement for all. So in terms of progress monitoring measure. I felt like I had a little musical note there to go with it. That was good. MAP, as I mentioned, allows us to measure student achievement and growth within and across academic years. And I'd liken it to going to the doctor's office with your child and having your child stand against the wall and get measured. And then, the doctor will take and go to the growth charts to say, oh yeah, students at this age are about here. Your child's a little higher, a little lower, and we would expect your child to grow this much during the year. In a like fashion, MAP is based on a national norm sample. So it looks at students across the country and says, well, your student is here. This is how much we would expect that student to grow this year. And because it's anchored to a national norm sample, it's an empirically driven scale. That is, it's based on how kids actually perform instead of a cut point that was determined by a group of people sitting in a room talking about what career and college readiness should be. So what do we learn from that? Because this was a new assessment for Portland. It had been a while since we'd used that. Well, I was pleasantly surprised to see just how strongly these two measures are related to one another. If we look at the correlations between MAP, both in reading and math, to the Smarter Balanced Consortium results, we see that even in the fall, the correlations are at or above 0.8 for both reading and math. And those relationships do nothing but get stronger during the academic year, so that the variance, how much wiggle room there is between those two assessments actually diminishes over time. They become more and more closely related as we go forward. So it's a stronger relationship as we move forward. And again, for those of you who maybe haven't been in Stat 101 for a while, positive correlations can go from 0, no relationship, to perfect 1. Well, at 0.82, and by the end of the year, and some of those, it's 0.9 plus in math, 75 to 80% of the variability in student scores is correlated. It's a very high relationship between these two tests. So what does that mean for proficiency? Well, a student's MAP performance in the fall can correctly identify how they're going to do in Smarter Balanced in terms of career and college readiness with about 85% accuracy in the fall. That's a tremendously good predictive relationship. So we have a really strong ability to have some sense of how students, if they have an average educational experience, they experience 1 year of education, how they'll show up on the Smarter Balanced assessment at the end of the year. Again, that relationship tightens as the year goes on. So bottom line, when I look at this and I look at this data, I think Portland has put a wonderful progress monitoring tool in place that's highly correlated to the final accountability measure, the summative measure, and it'll allow us not only to understand where our kids start each year, but be able to monitor at least once during the course of the year, are we closing gaps? And then look again at the end of the year to have some sense of where we're going to land on SBAC as well. So it's a wonderful progress monitoring tool, and it will help our teachers explain to students the growth that they've achieved during the course of the year, irrespective of where they are on that achievement continuum. So looking back, what did we see in this? Because I think it's really important to understand other things that we learned from this assessment. So because it's based on a national norm reference sample, the expectation is that 50% of students would meet or exceed growth targets. And if you do that, any group of students, if that happens, then that group keeps up with the national average. If more than 50% of the students meet or exceed that target, then you begin to close gaps, because those students then are advancing relative to their peers around the country. Unfortunately, we didn't see that. What we see in many of our student groups is that less than 50% of our students were making adequate growth, which means that they're losing ground over time. And not surprisingly, some of our racial subgroups, underserved racial subgroups, lost ground as well, which really gets back to that imperative. If we're going to change achievement, we first must accelerate growth for our students, and we don't see evidence of that, and we need to move forward to try to improve that. So there's some implications for Smarter Balance. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that racial gaps persist. Because if we know that students weren't making the growth that would be necessary to close those gaps, then those gaps certainly would be expected to persist. So while I had a chart there where the lines converged, that's the ideal. That's where you accelerate growth and one group begins to catch up by raising achievement over time. What we saw instead was the opposite, where groups were beginning to fall a little further behind. So when we see the Smarter Balance results overall, pleased to say that Portland students still outperform the state as a whole. We see that in English language arts, that we had 58% of Portland students scored at or above the career and college readiness threshold on the SBAC exams, whereas only 53.4% of students across the state did that, hit that same marker. There was a drop in proficiency, both for Portland students and for the state as a whole. And if you look at Portland and look at the other large systems around the state, Portland was sort of in the middle of that in terms of the drop that we saw in English language arts. It troubles me a little that there was a drop in English language arts proficiency across the entire state. That becomes a little harder to understand versus if you saw it in one system that was doing something different, you might be able to explain that change a little bit easier. As I mentioned earlier, given that we saw a lack of differential growth for students of color or differential growth in the wrong direction, it's not surprising the gaps persist. And so in Portland, there are substantial gaps in achievement between different student groups on the Smarter Balance assessments. This is true across the state as well. In English language arts, those gaps are actually wider in Portland public schools than they are around the state. A similar pattern exists in mathematics. Again, Portland students outperformed the state as a whole on the mathematics exam. We see that 45.8% of students in Portland score at or above the career and college readiness threshold, whereas only 39.4% of students around the state score at or above that threshold. Again, both the state as a whole dropped on this as well as Portland. And again, if you look at Portland's results on this, in comparison to other large systems around the state, we're sort of in the middle of that. The whole state went downward, urban systems went downward as well. In terms of looking at the performance of different student groups, and again, the decline in proficiency and the gaps between student groups, I think is foreshadowed by what we saw on the map results. We shouldn't be surprised. We didn't see any evidence that we would expect to be closing gaps last year, and we don't see that. So there are substantial gaps in performance between different student groups on mathematics. Those gaps in Portland are actually a little smaller than they are across the state as a whole, but clearly we have large gaps that need to be addressed in mathematics as well. So with this, that provides a broad summary. There was a complementary document that went into a little bit more detail that broke it down by grade level, by racial groups, and also by service groups, and also gave results to the board by building, by subject. So if you have any additional questions at this point, I'd be more than happy to address those.
Great, thank you, Dr. Brown. I just sense a question coming from Dr. Scott, or Director Scott.
Maybe, yeah. Actually, just a really quick question. We talk about comparing to the state as a whole, which is fine, and it's. I guess I'm glad that we outperform the state a little bit. Is there a difference between rural and urban schools when you look at state scores? And is it more appropriate to compare Portland Public Schools to the suburban districts surrounding us versus the entire state, or do we not see that difference?
So I have to admit, I am still relatively new.
As am I.
I don't have the level of familiarity with all the systems around the state that I would like to have. I can say that what I did was I looked at, I believe it was the top 10 in terms of enrollment. Now, the vast majority of those surround us. So when I say that we sort of fell in the middle in terms of that, I was including many of the surrounding systems.
So I'm just going to follow up on that question. So if you were to look at outside of Oregon, because when we get to the rest of the data, the rest of the state's not very reassuring, and our kids aren't competing necessarily, our students aren't necessarily competing against, just against other Oregon students for either jobs or admissions to college, trade programs. If you were to compare it to high-performing districts across the country of comparable size, how would we stack up?
So I'm going to answer that question a little differently because I don't know. Again, I'm not entirely familiar with the SBAC pool and how many comparable systems are in the SBAC pool that I could look at. What I can say is, looking at the NWA results and looking at where so NWA is nationally norm reference, so we know where the national average is at a grade level. Well, when we look at that, the cut score for what's considered to be career and college, or on track for career and college readiness in third grade, falls somewhere around the 60th percentile, which means that 4 out of 10 students around the country would be expected to be scoring above that, and 6 out of 10 students would be expected to score below it, which mirrors what you see for the state as a whole for mathematics, about 40% proficiency. So the fact that we're exceeding that tells me that we're exceeding the national norms on these assessments when we look at our data in aggregate. This is why, again, focusing on the board goals, I spent so much time talking about underserved students of color and accelerating growth, because we simply cannot change those students' achievement if we don't accelerate their growth.
I had a couple of questions as well. So when you're talking about, I'm looking at this graph here, it's not titled, but it shows the two students. The student 2 is a lower performer, and are you saying that this, measuring that rate of growth rather than their proficiency is, I'm not even sure how to ask the question. How are we getting those lower performers, those performers that are in the bottom quintile up to at least the norm?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's really important. Part of the reason for focusing on growth, or talking about focusing on growth, and I think this is now my third meeting, because it helps incentivize moving students no matter where they are in the distribution. If we focus solely on achievement, we're focusing on very narrow proficiency. We focus solely on proficiency, we're focusing on a very narrow band of achievement. It's almost like a light switch. It's on or off. Either you hit it or you don't. Well, truthfully, we have some students who enter a school who are going to flip that light switch no matter what we do. And their families often get frustrated with us because we don't demonstrate additional growth for those students during the course of the academic year, and the proficiency measure is not really relevant for them. On the other hand, the example that you gave, if you've got somebody that's in the bottom quintile, it's highly unlikely that you're going to move large numbers of students who are in the bottom quintile above that proficiency threshold in a single year. So how do you communicate the value of what they've learned? How do you communicate to them, oh, you've learned, in this year, you've learned as much as most kids would in 1.25 years, or almost as if you had another semester of school. How do you convey that to them if we solely focus on, again, whether or not they're proficient? They're falling short of that. So growth affords us that opportunity to say, oh, yes, you've learned what was expected in the course of this year, or you learned more than what was expected. And you can quantify that in terms of how much additional instructional time that would mean for a student. It also helps then communicate to students, I think, a sense of success. I did what I was supposed to, or I did more than what I was expected to do this year, even though maybe I'm not quite proficient yet. I think that's incredibly important. And again, my experience, and one of the things I think we learned from NCLB, is if you focus solely on that cut point, some bad things tend to happen. Kids at the top tend to regress downward because we spend a whole lot of time focused on just that cut point. And it's just inherent to the structural, it's a perverse consequence of the incentive. And on the other hand, where do folks who are below that cut point, where do we focus? Well, schools, and principals who are interested in maintaining their positions over time get real interested in kids that they think they can get over that bar. When in fact we have to be making investments with those kids in that lowest quintile. And we have to make those investments consistently. Otherwise, we'll move those kids. It's a good short-term strategy, but it's almost like borrowing money with a massive interest rate. Kids keep falling further and further behind, and it takes more and more to move them at that point. Again, this is why I advocated for focusing on growth, because it moves all students. It incentivizes and can communicate the movement of all students, irrespective of their achievement level. So put simply, since I've been droning on here, you can't change achievement without accelerating growth. It just can't happen. It's dependent on it. On the other hand, I can grow anyone, irrespective of their achievement level. So the gifted and talented student can grow. The kid in the lowest quintile can grow. So.
Director Moore?
So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for the memos. They were very helpful. I still have a couple questions that I think say more about me than they do about the memo, but so I'll take those offline.
I'm not so sure about that, but.
So I really like the focus on growth. It makes sense to me, and but I do have a question. So in the memo you gave us on the NWEA growth and achievement monitoring, that one.
Yes.
On page 1, 2, 3, 4, I think.
There's one of those things that I could have done. I could have
I'm
numbered
sorry,
the
what?
pages.
Yes, please.
Yeah, page numbers would be good. But anyway, I think it's on page 4 in the challenge section. So I get the concept that in order to narrow the gap, making the norm, reaching the norm is not good enough.
Absolutely not.
Okay. But in the second paragraph, or third paragraph in that section, I'm going to read these two sentences, and because this really is kind of puzzling to me. Okay, in both the English language arts and mathematics, the scores necessary to achieve proficiency on SBAC are significantly higher than the national average. In order to achieve proficiency, students have to score at or above the level observed by 6 out of 10, the 60th percentile, students in the national normative sample.
That, by the way, I was conservative when I said that. It's actually higher in some grades.
Okay, so.
Yes, that's painful, isn't it?
It is, and puzzling to me. So we have a national standard test that requires that we all be Lake Wobegon. I mean, that average isn't even grade level?
So I think there's, and I've tried to date, and not entirely successfully, I might add, not to interchange proficiency with being on track to be career and college ready. We've gotten a little loose with that language. So historically, proficiency was really around probably the 35th percentile. And if we thought about, what it meant to be on track, for most students' grade level in a nationally normative sample would be somewhere within plus or minus 1 standard deviation from the mean. Well, there was significant pressure from higher educational institutions and also just this notion to go to Director Brim Edwards that we're in competition with the world. And so there was an effort to say, well, we need to raise the bar. And we want our students now to be career and college ready. Well, that means something very different. It's a much higher bar. And that's one that systems in the country are not going to gravitate to instantly. It will take time. It's moving the entire distribution of kids upward over time. This is an incredibly heavy lift. And I think you've hit it on the head. We're asking our students to do something we've never asked them to do before. And it's a big lift. It really is.
Okay.
I feel about that way sometimes too.
Yeah, so I'm a little, I feel like I want to have a very long discussion with you about SBAC and assessments and,
Welcome at any time you'd like.
okay.
And so we're looking at normed scores of what actually happens. I think what you described as a non-normed.
It's a standard-based threshold, which is socially constructed. So a group of people got in a room and said, this is what we think should be the threshold score that reflects the set of skills that we think would reflect a student being on track to be career and college ready by the time they leave high school. And
Which is a much higher standard than
grade level.
we've ever had.
Yeah,
Yeah, a much higher standard than,
being on grade level for reading, yeah.
okay, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And feeds into the whole historical, our schools are failing, our schools are failing, our schools are failing. Well, if you keep moving the bar.
Yes, so when I think about this in terms of just a quick example, I could talk about, student athletes and, trying to run a mile. And I'm not a good person maybe for this in terms of examples, but there would be a reasonable threshold for an average student to be able to run a mile in high school. And if we raise that bar to say what it would take to be a competitive college athlete, many students would find it quite difficult to reach that bar. And we'd have to start much earlier with them if we were going to try to get them to be competitive at that level. So yeah, it's a substantial shift in our expectations for the educational outcomes for all students across the country.
But, not necessarily a bad one, though.
No, it's different.
I hear the conversation is really interesting, but making sure we're setting the bar high enough is also really important. I have a similar question, it may be less sophisticated than the way Director Moore just asked it. When we talk about setting these growth targets, so I think I get and by the way, I think the focus on growth is the right focus, and it addresses some of the questions we had earlier about just getting people over the bar of proficiency. So I really appreciate this, and I look forward to talking about it a little bit more in our goals work session. But I'm just, from a math perspective, I think I sort of understand if 50% are meeting your growth target, if more than that, you're going to be closing the gap. If less than that, you're going to be widening the gap. But who sets the growth targets?
So the growth targets are actually, again, empirically derived. So if I score 200 on the MAP assessment, and that's my fall score, and I'm in 4th grade, then what NWA has done is looked at within the normative sample, on average, how many points did a student gain who scored 200 by the end of the year? So it's the normative growth for students at that score point. And so, that is set at every score point across the distribution, and it's done by subject and by grade.
Is it then broken out in terms of different demographic groups? Or I guess the question I'm getting at is, we don't want our students who have been underserved and are performing poorly to just grow at the standard rate. We want them to grow at a much accelerated rate.
Absolutely.
So are the growth targets very different for students lower on the scale than higher on the scale?
Yes.
Is my question making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at this distribution, I actually had this conversation with Director Bailey earlier. The growth targets tend to be greater for students who are further away from the mean.
Okay.
And so the expectation's higher. On top of that, when we're talking about having 6 in 10 kids cross that threshold, to be able to do that, effectively you have to bump up the growth for everybody to get there. And logically speaking, students who are meeting or exceeding growth targets already, you don't add more to that. But for the kids that are below that threshold, then you're setting an aggressive goal that actually bumps more kids over that threshold, and it moves the whole distribution over time.
And I think that's going to be, I mean, we've talked about that as a board, and so I know for me, and I think for the other members, just making sure that we can explain that publicly as well, that this focus on growth really is focused on bringing people up. And we're setting some really aggressive targets, which is going to be followed with aggressive resources and aggressive supports, right, to bring students up.
Yes, I don't think I have, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do have it in front of me. So this past year, had 60% of our underperforming students in 3rd grade, students of color who are traditionally underserved and underperforming, had they met or exceeded their growth targets, and I modeled this very conservatively, again, just moving the distribution up by, again, adding to kids who are below the threshold, not above, it would have raised their MAP scores by 3.4 points. Okay, what does that mean? 3.4 points on that scale doesn't necessarily say anything to anybody. That's about 57 days of instruction. That's the equivalent of about 57 days of instruction. That is a lot. It's about 11 and a half weeks, and it would have translated to about a 5.5 percentage point gain had we accomplished that this year. And that would have been this year while the state was going downhill.
So the discussion, part of the discussion we had this afternoon was we can sort of crudely say if we want to get this much progress in student achievement, we can almost map that out in terms of, well, how much instructional time will that take, and therefore how many additional resources will we need to add to. We can, again, it's not a one-to-one, but sort of crudely cost that out. So if we go into our goal discussion tonight and we set a goal around 3rd grade reading, we can backwards map that onto budget to say, well, that means this much in terms of reading specialists and getting kids additional resources, for example. Again, just as a rule of thumb, but that should give us an indication of when we're looking at, knock on wood, again, our Student Success Act, additional funds coming in, what we have. Does that match our 4 goals in terms of the resources we need? We can at least suss that out for the math and reading.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things just like with proficiency, one of the dangers, right, is you just move a few people across the line, your numbers look better, but you haven't really achieved. With growth, there's also a similar problem. If the entire distribution just moves up at the same rate, that's not a failure because you've moved everybody up, but it is a failure because you haven't decreased the achievement gaps. And so I want to make sure we keep that focus.
So I think it's really important, you bring up an incredibly important point. So the way the goals are stated, the focus on closing the gap is explicitly stated around students of color who are underserved in the system. And it's really talking about accelerating growth for that student population, specifically for exactly what you were saying. Because if we just do that for everybody, then everybody moves up, and that's great, but the gaps persist.
Right.
So we expect everyone to grow here. We're again doing better than the state. The state is doing comparable to the country. We want to see that those gaps that have existed over time close, and we need to move a group of students upward in that as we're moving everybody up.
And that's why the goals we'll be discussing in the work session talk about 60% meeting or exceeding their growth targets for students of color, as opposed to 50%, which is sort of the norm.
So I have a question about, and I don't know if this is for you, Dr. Brown, or for the superintendent. But I'm thinking, how are we, as a district, going to translate all this into something that is understandable and actionable for parents? Because in slide 5, you have PPS as an excellent progress measure in place one of the things that I think will make it sustainable, if it is excellent, is that people understand it and utilize it. To date, the SBAC system, you get the results as a parent either in August or, I mean, it's too late to do anything. The school year's already gone. So I'm interested in how we're going to translate this into real information that's understandable to the parent community and the broader community that are supporting students, because this is it's a very different concept than just trying to, you know, turn the light switch on. So.
Well, I think the first step was to actually institutionalize an interim assessment that we can progress monitor our students' growth over time. And sort of as a next step is to more widely work with our families to educate them on the information that those assessments is revealing. So for all of these MAP assessments, we can generate a parent report, which will help sort of illustrate for our families where their child is along that growth expectation. So while we want all of our students to get better, we in particular want to accelerate the growth of our students who are behind. We know that the growth they need to make is greater. Our focus, obviously, as we move into sort of action steps, is what those more intensive supports and interventions look like, because we want to get at the 60% or more, because we know they're predictive and they have a very strong correlation to what we expect to see on the summative, which doesn't do the teacher or the families any good because it comes the following year in October when you see those results. And what I think our educators appreciate is the more real-time information they're getting to make adjustments in their instructional practices, and for our principals and our school leadership teams and centrally, that we're able to sort of look at the landscape generally and apply levers and supports where we see that there might be student groups who really need that additional support. So we do have an exciting opportunity in front of us because the Student Success Act calls out, in particular, students who are underserved in those student groups. So the design of those strategies and interventions is going to be an important conversation, which we look forward to having.
The other piece is parent engagement and specific strategies that parents can use at home that are appropriate for supporting what's going on in the classroom and where their student is at.
So I guess as we shift to a new measure and a different way of thinking about it, I think we have to be very intentional, because parents are going to get a number of different indicators of how their students are doing. It could be the report card or a progress report. It could be the SBAC results. There's this new thing, MAP, that's giving them growth. It may be, well, my student got sent to the next grade as an indicator. They must be, you know, at benchmark. So I think we have to help make sense of all that, because most of our parents, most of us included, aren't educators. And it will be confusing because you now have a lot of different things, and I think a lot of parents assume, well, they're just going on to the next grade, and nobody said they couldn't, so are they at grade level? So I think having a very intentional strategy about how we communicate with parents about the shift, and then what it means and why it's important, why they should pay attention to this versus something else, or prioritize it, will be key to actually being able to make it sustainable and lasting.
I had one more comment, and that was similar, that I don't have a PhD, and I found the reading a little bit difficult to grasp, and I feel like if I had a hard time with it, probably some parents out there as well wouldn't be able to digest it. Also feel a little disadvantaged by not having a background in education. Thank you.
I would just add that I think it's so important that we have, like you said, the data around what growth looks like and how we've talked about closing the achievement gap for quite a while. And so to have really hard, solid evidence about what it looks like to do so, I think will really help us as we set these goals. And we do have a lot to think about and to transition with that. But like Director Bailey said, this helps us really begin to look at what are the strategies, what are the interventions, how do we go from a 50% growth rate to a 90% growth rate for certain, I'm just going to be really excited about growth, 90% growth rate for some populations that we have continued to struggle with. So I think it is a lot and it is complex, and I don't have a PhD, did not take statistics, Spanish major, but I think that this really gives us the details around how we begin to really, really thoughtfully resource and invest so our students can grow and achieve in the ways we need them to be the kind of graduates PPS is looking for.
My first question, how come you didn't read the Spanish version of the proclamation today,
No one asked me to, but Jonathan did a way better job than I would have done. Mr. Garcia did.
I think directors are right. I think there's a big parent education piece here. I think there's a wholesale calibration that we need to do around grade level expectations. I think this is why we need to keep moving downwards into what we mean by proficiency-based grading, because any parent, any student for that matter, should be able to sort of take their piece of writing and gauge it around a rubric, so that, I see that my work is a level 1, 2, 3, 4. What does that mean? What a mastery of a math concept looks like that indicates a proficiency of understanding, or a MAP assessment. I think we start with the instrument that we now have. I think there's a lot of built-in tools and resources there that a lot of thought has gone into, and how they can help parents be educated about what that information tells us. I think we have the lift of hosting many nights in our school communities to really walk them through those reports so that they can understand that this more short cycle, real-time information gives us really essential data that we need to make some immediate adjustments to instructional practice and the student experience, so that the next time that interim hits, that we're hitting those growth targets that we want to see, particularly where we want to be more aggressive and assertive about accelerated growth for certain student groups.
My daughter Paige is a freshman at Cleveland, and she has 3 different types of grading, 2 different proficiency-based and 1 that's more traditional. And so I think that's another, as we look at how do we communicate with parents where students are. I'm not clear on any of it, she is, but how do we explain where students are and how they're performing so we can provide necessary supports as parents if needed.
I would love to see a series of 3-minute videos in different all our appropriate languages and cultures that in lay terms explain it all. A series, bite-sized chunks, concept.
Right, Jonathan?
Great suggestion, Director Bailey. So I'd just one last question about information in here. So on slide number 8, talks about with less than 50% meeting growth, we would expect achievement gaps to widen. And on slide 7, it has every single category, 14 categories, and only 3 are over 50%. Does that mean the other 11, the gaps are widening?
So what that means is that either the gaps are widening or there is a decline in achievement versus the national norm for those.
Neither one's good.
Neither one's good. Agreed. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the SBAC scores and the fact that the entire state declined. So I guess 2 questions. One, is there any national comparison? Like, did other states decline? Did they do something to SBAC, or is this Oregon? And 2, how significant is a 1 or 2% decline? Like, is this hair on fire urgent? Is this concerning? Is it interesting? I mean, how do I calibrate my reaction to this?
So the way I looked at it, again, the state as a whole went down, both in reading and math, and virtually across every grade level. I think there might have been one where there was a little bit of an uptick, but insignificant. So I sort of common sense step back and say, well, what changed in education across the entire state? Did we have a change in curriculum last year? Did we have a change in, what would have adversely impacted student achievement across the state? And I'm not aware of anything that would have. And so that leaves me then with a question to try to explain that, because there's nothing inherent to education across the entire state community that would lead me to expect a decline in scores. I would think that education last year was not probably a whole lot different than the year before across the state. So I don't have a good causal explanation for why those scores went down. They just went down. Again, I'm a little new to SBAC, so I haven't looked across the entire consortium to see, well, was that unique across the entire consortium? Did somebody come in or out of the consortium and maybe impacted norming for the group? I don't know. Was it recalibrated? I don't know. But I begin to wonder. So if I know the state as a whole went down, well, I can just sort of draw like a center line through our data and say, well, how much different are we from the state? Well, we're within a percentage point. If I look at the state as the neutral line, we're within a percentage point. While that's disappointing, it's not hair on fire for me. That's sort of within the normal up or down that you would see if you had things going along the way they have been. If you hadn't made a substantial change in growth yet.
And I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it, but looking across the state, they could have gone down because everyone declined modestly, or they could have gone down because a lot of schools declined a lot and a few held steady or even improved. So disaggregating among districts is going to be really important. Maybe you've already done that.
Again, when I looked at the 10 or so largest systems across the state, they virtually all went down comparable
By
to
about the
us,
same amount.
about the same as us. And
Okay.
again, if you put that center line through, some are a little bit above, some are a little bit
Okay.
below, but
So you haven't yet found the outline urban district that in this last year actually saw some
shown
growth
this
while
massive.
everyone else saw
No,
bigger decline.
I did not see that.
That's too bad.
We'd love to visit.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure this is the first of many. Appreciate a fresh set of eyes and the discussion. So our next agenda item hopefully will be the sort of the move forward, the go forward piece of this discussion, which is an overview of the Student Success Act, a piece of legislation that passed in the last legislative session that will make a very significant investment in schools. And Superintendent, you're introducing the item?
Yeah, this is going to involve a few of our senior leaders. For starters, watch your step there, Deputy Superintendent. We're going to have Deputy Superintendent Claire Hertz kick us off, and welcoming back to the podium here, Chief Jonathan Garcia. And then we have Dr. Aurora Terry here, Senior Director, College and Career Readiness, to walk us through a little more detail than gave you a sneak peek at our last board meeting, as we continue to learn a few more details about the Student Success Act, which is relevant to the conversation we were just having and we'll have after this around making sure all of our students are achieving, especially our underserved students. So.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent. A team of staff have been working to build on our visioning work from this past year, and we've been given the opportunity. Get closer. Okay, now? Still not on? Yes? Okay. We've been given the opportunity to invest in PPS Reimagined passed by our state legislators this past spring. This will be a This will be a statewide biennial investment of $2 billion, beginning with $1 billion in 2020-21. Much of the work we've been doing for the past year with the board, staff, and community aligns with the implementation of the Student Success Act. Our district goals and strategic plan will integrate into the student investment account application and help us fund our plans into actions. We are striving to realize the graduate portrait laid out in our district vision and constructed through a comprehensive process including thousands of comments, conversations, and data points shared by our community. The infusion of funding from the Student Success Act will help PPS begin the transformative work to fulfill the 2030 vision for the district. As our legislators approve this funding, they recognize there is a demographic shift happening in our state. Students in early learning programs are now a majority of students of color. This has been a growing trend for some time. As they continue to grow through our schools, our students of colors will be the majority of students across the state. The Student Success Act is legislation centered around equity. This is Oregon's first significant education investment in 3 decades. It is our responsibility to take these funds and turn them into actions to reduce academic disparities and increase academic achievement.
Good evening. My name's Aurora Terry, and I'm the Senior Director of College and Career Readiness, and I'm going to take it from here. And so as our district is asked to contemplate how we will be focusing the funds, schools and districts in Oregon are being called upon to engage in continuous improvement in order to improve outcomes for students. And a continuous improvement process is one in by which our district will determine what is working and what needs to change, establish a process to engage stakeholders to effect the change, and then leverage effective practices to implement a plan, and use data to monitor and make timely adjustments to improve outcomes. So this continuous improvement process will result in the development of our action plan, where we will routinely collaborate with our community stakeholders and partners. And so, as you know, we are currently in the process of creating a district strategic plan, and we additionally are working on our continuous improvement plan that is due to the state November 1st, and now we are going to begin working on our student investment account plan. And so our vision for our district is to work to align to create one plan that incorporates all of the processes that through the continuous improvement cycle, so that we're not creating 3 separate plans, that we have one plan that brings alignment and clarity. So I think as Courtney Westling spoke to all of you about a few weeks ago at the board meeting, she went through a little bit of how the Student Success Act will be separated by the different key areas of investment. And so, and again, to reiterate, at the heart of the Student Success Act, there's a commitment to improving access and opportunities for students who have been historically underserved in the education system. And our application that will be due in March requires us to describe how our budget and how our plan is designed to achieve targeted student outcomes. And so as we look at the 3 key areas of investment, there are 5 top priorities that have been specified into the new law that we'll need to describe the measurable outcomes for. So reducing academic disparities for students, meeting students' mental and behavioral health needs, providing equitable access to academic courses, allowing teachers and staff sufficient time to collaborate and review students' grades, absences, discipline, and school-level data, as well as to establish and strengthen partnerships. And so the first part of the student investment account, which is, as described from that $2 billion pot, 50% of it will be for Portland Public Schools. We estimate approximately $39 million to support the students in Portland Public School, and these funds are tied directly to additional outcomes for students of color, students with disabilities, emerging bilingual students, students navigating poverty, homelessness, or foster care, as well as student groups that have been historically experiencing academic disparities. So those are the student groups that we have to target as we create our district plan of action.
Just a question about that.
Please.
So board members should feel free to ask questions during the presentation. And I'll set the tone here. So the 39 million, in the Student Success Act, is there a requirement that you can't supplant funds? So if, say, PPF spent $5 million on a particular intervention this year, all of a sudden we get 39 million, we couldn't take 5 million of the 39 million, pay for that program, and then do something else. We couldn't count it. It has to be new initiatives. Or a new increment, a new increase.
So
But
the
just-
39 million will go through a whole process that it will align to our strategic plan, and we'll submit an application. First, we'll bring that the application to you. It's a student investment account, and so you will review how those expenditures are being spent in alignment to the requirements of the law. So the moving it from one place to another I will have to circle back on this part because it's in general fund, where there's the two other pots of money are grant funds that are reimbursements. Okay, so it's not clear to me. I haven't asked that specific question. But what I have done is always thought of it as forward thinking and supporting our vision and our strategic plan. So that's a staff's plan, but I will ask, this is very new information. We're getting lots of opportunities to ask questions, so I'll go ahead, I will ask that question particularly.
Just to be clear, I wasn't at all asking that to be done.
Sure.
I was asking in the sense of, I think the expectation was these would be
Yes.
sort of new interventions or new strategies or increases versus we're going to backfill existing funding and then do something else with the other.
So we have, the actual application will come to you for review, then it goes to the Oregon Department of Ed for review and approval, and then it comes back to you, and then you guys actually adopt the grant or the application in the plan.
So I'll have 2 more times to ask the question.
Yes.
And we're absorbing the information as quickly as it's released, but there haven't been, frankly, specific rules and regulations around it. I would be really surprised if monies here are intended for to be supplanting. If you could go back one slide there, Aurora. It's really important to be clear that these new resources are intended for those listed student groups. They're not intended to be sort of absorbed into sort of the general work of the district. We still have our general funds there. The intention is to disrupt the patterns of underperformance of those groups in the way that we were just talking about.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have the answer. You can supplant. It's not like Measure 98, but I don't know very much more than that. I just remember that is true. So more information to come.
So I think that should be a really intentional discussion we have, because I think it would be very disappointing if that was the outcome.
I wouldn't be going to any one of those communities to say that.
So I do hope we have this discussion again, and I'm going to put down a marker in a slightly different place, which is that when state or federal government tends to put maintenance of efforts on, or frankly, when a board puts maintenance of efforts on, it can actually take away from some of the things that we need to do with the resources. So I think the most important thing is that the district have flexibility with the funds, and that we as a board, working with the superintendent and his staff, invest them in the best way possible. There may be programs where the money from the state is eligible for something that we're already spending on that we want to continue doing, which frees up money in our existing budget for other things that are really important that maybe can't be funded with the Student Success Act. That would be a very smart investment as a district. So I want to be very clear, just sort of saying, only new programs may actually be limiting in a way that is unintended.
I want to agree with keeping an open mind on that. Different districts around the state have made different choices. And here in Portland, we've done some things unsustainably that aren't covered under the Student Success Act, and other districts have done it differently. I'm thinking around maintenance, I'm thinking around our IT system, where we know we need to make some investments. And so I think we need to just be open and very transparent in how this comes down.
Director Scott, I believe it was you who said we needed to be aggressive in, was that correct, earlier on tonight about the, like, following through with these goals and be aggressive about being clear? And I think, you know, that flexibility allows us to be aggressive in the right ways, but I think that comes down to a board agreement of these students are who we're making this promise and commitment to: students of color, students with disability, emerging bilingual students, students navigating poverty, and historically underserved students. So I think whatever we do, if we as a board kind of hold that, is this getting us to our goals? But your point about what's in the law, what's not, as long as I'm comfortable with supplanting, as long as we have clarity around this really has to be about the best thing for those student groups.
I guess just my thought on the supplanting, I think it sometimes can be a dangerous thing to supplant, and we have a fair amount of discretion with most of our rest of our resources, that I think the expectations are going to be high that we're going to, with the $39 million, make a difference for the students that are listed there. And if there's any supplanting or backfilling dollars, that we'll have to make a really strong case of why we couldn't use, you know, the other $500 million that we have discretion on to fund that, like whether it's for IT or something else. I just think the legislature is, I think they gave us flexibility, but it's also some flexibility with expectations that's who we're going to focus on.
Okay. So these are non-competitive grants, so at least that's something.
This first 39 million is.
Right. So are we going to have to do this exercise every year? Like, we're going to have to?
The intent is this would be an ongoing process, and it's actually a best practice having a strategic plan, as you know, aligning with all of our continuous improvement plan. And the student investment account is simply the money to fund it. So really, while they're three big processes, we're aligning them into one. You'll see that later in our budget calendar that we're
I
bringing
have no
forward.
problem. I'm talking about the grants. I'm
Right.
talking about,
Do we have to apply every year for the
do we have to apply every year? I mean, are we going to have to,
So
please, sir, may I, every year?
We will go through a strategic planning process update on an annual basis. And so the one that's coming, the student investment account, is based on ADMW. And we'll have to continually show that there's some accountability to receiving that money. So yes, there is a process every year.
Okay, I don't know whether I
Average daily
totally missed
membership
this,
weighted
but,
ADMW.
but I thought this was going to be, I thought this initial bucket of money was just going to be thrown into the state school fund.
No, it's not.
Okay, so apparently I missed that in the beginning. Okay.
We're going to go
Sorry.
through a little bit more here.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to walk through the other pieces, and maybe that'll
Sure.
answer some questions?
This is the suggested timeline for our approach this year. So right now, we are going to be engaging in some community engagement, and Jonathan Garcia is going to speak to the plans around the community engagement pieces. November 1st, our continuous improvement plan is due to the state. And then in March of 2020 is when our application for the Student Success Act grant is due in March 2020. So that will give us time to align with our continuous improvement plan, as well as it will be nice timing with the budget cycle as we're looking through that. And then,
Sorry.
Please.
Do you know when we hear back from the state? I mean, they're going to have to sign off on it, right? When we
Yes,
hear
and
that?
we'll have a calendar for you in a little bit here. And that goes into, has specific dates. The other thing that I'll say is that the actual plan that we're bringing forward has to be approved at the state level for this year. This first time it'll be for 3 years. The following time, because we're starting in the middle of a biennium, and the following time it'll be every 4 years. But this district will have a multi-year business plan reviewed on an annual basis so that we continue to evolve with our work. While it's not required by the state is 3 years the first round, 4 years from there on. Yes.
and the dollars will be available July of the next budget year, July of 2020. So the other pieces of the investment is 20% will be going to creating and fully funding early intervention and early childhood special education programs, as well as working to expand relief nurseries, establishing an early learning equity fund, as well as adding preschool slots, including Preschool Promise, Oregon pre-kindergarten programs, and providing professional development for early childhood educators. And the last part,
Can I just ask a
Please.
question about this? So would our Head Start programs have an opportunity to receive some of that funding?
We're not entirely clear what the funding mechanism is going to be. There's obviously a lot of providers, not just PPS. We have been involved in the Preschool for All Task Force all this past school year. So we also know we're going to need all those partners just to begin to meet the demand. So we've only just started initiating conversations about what constellation of folks can access these monies to open up where we need seats for 4-year-olds around the school district. So if you think about the groups that are listed there, it would be great to see PK5 schools so that kids are getting that kind of a head start. So some of it might be our own early education team, but some of it might be community providers as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I should have asked the question a little bit different, a better way, which was not just like the PPS Head Start, but like, say, Albina Head Start, other providers who traditionally have provided services.
We actually met with Albina Head Start this morning on this very
Awesome.
topic, yeah.
Okay, so this is 20% of all of the new money, right? Who gets this? Is this controlled by the state, or is this given to districts, or?
So they are still writing the rules on this, okay? I'm not
Okay.
kidding. So it's, you've heard the designing the plane as you're flying it, right?
And it's on
You're
fire,
building it,
yeah,
right,
okay.
all those things. So literally, this got passed June 30th.
Right.
It has to be implemented, where we have to have things up and running we have all these things to get done, to have something to submit to the state in February. So truly, they are hiring in the hiring process at ODE for the people who are writing the rules for us to do this work. So there aren't a lot of answers. We're getting layers of answers. I have 2 more meetings in this next week where I'll get more answers. So it's a frequent communication on the next steps.
Was there any legislative intent communicated around the size of these 3 buckets, or did ODE?
Go ahead.
I know that a couple of staff was with the governor earlier this afternoon.
I know we've got sort of five purposes to which the money to go, but now we've divided it into 3 different pots of money.
So just really quick on Rita's point, if you don't mind, on the early learning, what she said, but also it's going to be flowing through pre-existing programs like Preschool Promise, Early Head Start, those kinds of things. It's the only new program of the early learning bucket is the Equity Fund. Everything else we know about already, it already exists, but more money will be flowing. How that looks, we don't know yet, but I can tell you with preschool promise dollars, for example, we don't have to go through the hub to access that money, so that's, can be helpful, a little bit more flexible. But that's just for that. I hate using the word bucket all the time, but it's helpful for me. That's for preschool promise. So a lot more to come. Like Claire said, a lot of this is happening as we're in front of you. Probably not right now. They're not at work right now, but it's just every day there's more and more information coming out.
Is this a big increase in early learning in terms of percentage-wise?
It's a big increase. I don't know what the percentage is. The early intervention, early childhood special ed program, which is the contracts housed at David Douglas, that's a huge increase.
Yeah.
Pretty monumental, actually, because it's a program that has been successful.
Yeah.
On your point, the Joint Student Success Committee is where all of this happened. So all these percentages, it was not ODE saying, that sounds good. It was the committee members and a lot of folks around tables thinking about the best way to do it. So 50% of it is grants to districts for flexible ideas and around hitting those 5 priority areas. And then there's the 20% for early learning and the 30% for the statewide initiatives that we're going to get to.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Do we know yet what the Early Learning Equity Fund will be? Okay.
But I think it's important. It's
Really responsive work.
right. I think it's right. I think it's important to acknowledge that our communities of color or organizations that support our communities of color were very influential in making sure that there was early learning equity funds. And so, Latino Network, SEI, Albina, folks that under Commissioner Jessica Vega Peterson really led a lot of that conversation. So I think they are also in the conversations as we all collectively think about how to best use those funds to ensure that kids of color in particular are served at the early grades.
No, but this is just huge. I mean,
Okay. To use Courtney's term, the last final bucket is our statewide education initiatives. And so this remaining 30% of the fund will pay for, across the state, the high school success, expansion of nutrition programs, the youth engagement program, school safety, the African American and Black Student Success Plan, the American Indian and Alaskan Native Student Success Plan, Latinx Student Success Plan, professional learning for educators, ESD support for school districts, summer school for Title I schools, early indicator and intervention systems, high-cost disability fund, district support, and accountability and transparency are the funds that will be paid for from the last 30% of the overall budget.
And just a little more information, the ones with a star, those are new programs that didn't exist before. For example, the African American Black Student Success Plan, the American Indian Native Student Success Plan were created but never funded. And then the Latinx Student Success Plan is new and will be funded. That plan won't have to wait for years to have some resources behind it. And then ESD support for school districts is technical assistance for districts, especially smaller rural districts. But there's a bucket of money for those folks to help the less. They don't have as many staff people. Sometimes in those districts, superintendent's doing all of it. So it will just offer them some support. And then the district support and accountability and transparency are also, those are new initiatives, but they're actually tied to the student investment account because it's the accountability structure behind the 50% bucket, if that makes sense. And one more note on the nutrition programs, because I think it's really important. It's not gonna get us to universal meals, but it's gonna get us a lot closer to feeding a lot more kids for free, where we take the paperwork out of it. It's still I don't know what that's gonna shake out for people, how many schools that will mean for PPS to be like CEP eligible, but it's gonna make a big difference. Now we just need the feds to not make any changes to the SNAP eligibility rules, which is another ongoing issue, but hopefully that will be solved.
And I assume with this one, it's like the other ones, that the rules are still being made in terms of how this all flows out. Some of this might be competitive grants and some might be per pupil kind of allocation.
These are grant and aid, mostly reimbursement programs.
Okay, so it will be more evenly shared out.
That's the expectation.
Okay, thanks. Oh,
Okay.
and the earlier slide had this at up to 30%, and this says at least, so we've got at least 20, at least 30, and at least 50. That's at least 100. Yeah.
I don't believe the 50 is at least. I think it is a straight. I think these ones, the other two, my understanding is the other two can maybe.
Are a little, okay, okay, thanks.
So in terms of total funding, this question came up earlier, of the sort of $1 billion a year, right? And originally there was sort of these $70 million sort of estimates for PBS. Theoretically, our $39 million from sort of the first bucket is going to be supplemented by our successful grant applications for the second and third buckets. And we could easily see that type of resources coming into the district.
I'm hesitant to give any dollar amounts there
Sure.
after listening to all the conversations from the state. So the 39 million, I'm very confident in. The rest of it, it may not, some of it may not come to us and may go to another agency, right? So I don't want to,
Fair.
it may serve our kids, but it
Right.
may not come to PBS.
No, that's a fair point. Are there any provisions in the law requiring any sort of geographical equitable distribution of the buckets 2 and 3?
I'll have to go back and read the language. Everybody's been very focused on the student investment account.
Yeah.
And since we haven't seen a lot of language coming out on the other two yet, I don't know. But we'll find out.
Okay, I'm confused because I thought that's what the question I was asking about this third bucket was, whether it was competitive or allotted, and you seem to indicate that it was.
Competitive as in, we have to apply, we have to compete with other districts to get that money. I believe it is, well, I don't know what I believe.
'Cause I
I
thought
better,
that
I better double check.
what- Yeah, it's a matter
I'm not
of-
an expert yet either, so let me get more information and
So,
let you know.
so is, we're roughly, 8% of the state, so that first bucket, we're gonna get 8% of.
That's correct.
The preschool is, again, gonna go in all sorts of different directions. We may get pieces of that where appropriate, but it's, again, serving all our kids, no matter what the venue. That's great. And this third one, I thought I asked, is this 8% or is this not? And you sort of said yes.
It's not going to look like that cut and dry. I think it will probably be reflective of the need, but I don't know. I can't say it's going to be 8%.
So for instance, the first line, Measure 98, would be based on how many students we have in high school programs. So yes, that one would be that way. But then if you go to expansion of nutrition programs, I have a feeling that poverty will have an impact on that. And so it won't be just a straight
Gotcha.
percentage. So each line there is going to be done differently. That's why we're very hesitant to give you numbers.
Right, and even that, let me just finish this.
How about one more question and then we.
Yeah,
get to
yeah,
the timeline.
sorry.
That's okay.
So even that, though, is a sense of proportionality as opposed to a competitive system where we might be shut out or David Douglas might be shut out because of the quality of their grant in terms of the process. That was my question, but I know there might not be an answer now, so
I think
I'll
there's
move
no
on.
answer to that right
Okay.
now. You answered your own question. So
Wanna
the
argue
next.
with the answer.
So on this next slide, I'm not going to go through a lot of that. You'll see this embedded in the budget calendar. But these are the dates that are specifically tied to the Student Success Act in terms of what's going to come forward to the board throughout the year. And Cynthia and I are just about to present the budget calendar that will incorporate all of this Vision 2030, Student Success Act, all of it together on one piece of paper. Okay?
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Garcia. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer. So I'm going to take you through these 3 slides with a caveat that we are still in planning mode. As you obviously are, as it's clear, we're still learning a lot every day. And so one of the things that has been clear through the legislation is that community engagement involving our community in this conversation is of utmost importance. Obviously, as the school board, as the administration, we too care of making sure that our broader community, in particular our communities of color, communities that have been left out of the conversation, are centered in conversations, especially as it relates to these dollars that are coming in. And so what we know is that the Department of Education has shared their expectation that we will engage these particular communities that I know you all are committed to, that we are committed to. So folks and communities of color, students with disability, emerging bilinguals, et cetera, et cetera. So as we think about, as we began to think about how we're gonna do that, we're gonna center those experiences. If you recall, for those that were on the board prior to this previous election, when we did the community engagement process for our visioning, we were very intentional about making sure that voices from the margins, communities of color, that we went to where they were. And so whether that looked like big tent meetings or smaller intentional targeted groups, we're going to, in a quick and accelerated way, adapt some of those processes and those ideas. And so what we know is that at the beginning of next month, we will release an online survey where folks can contribute some of ideas connected to this work. And so that will run for about a month. We will work with our Office of Communications to ensure that we amplify that on our social media platforms, that we ensure that all of our school communities have access to the survey in all of our supported languages, to make sure that we get as much voices online as possible, because we realize that our communities may have different schedules that may not support them coming physically. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to engage folks in through different ways and different means. So again, we'll release that community survey October 1st, and that will run through the 31st. And so we've been working with our Office of Research Planning and Assessment to ensure that we are actually having that we actually have a survey that is meaningful for the process. It's not just this thing that we put online. So Dr. Brown and I and our Director of Community Engagement, Clark, have been working with to release that on October 1st. The state has also asked us to engage around these five priority areas. And again, as you think about the vision that you all helped steward to completion, a lot of these elements, a lot of these focus priority areas are already embedded in our vision, right? We're just looking at it from a different vantage point. We're looking at it if from a, I would say, an asset-based perspective, from a appreciative inquiry perspective, right? So I think it shifts the conversation where it's not an antagonistic kind of approach between community and the system, but I think it's saying, how do we collectively together lead towards a better future using some of these funds. And we know that as the superintendent likes to say, this is just an installment, right? And so how do we ensure that this installment continues to move the conversation forward in us realizing PPS Reimagined? And so as we began to think about what this engagement process will look like, I think some of the things that we wanted to make sure this engagement process fosters is ensuring that, that people generally understand. As we all know, we're just still trying to figure out the different components of the Student Success Act. And so every day we're getting more clarity from the state. Every day we're getting clarity from within. And so how do we make sure that we share that out broadly with our community in an easy access way? We also want to make sure that we begin to have that conversation about and crosswalking both the PPS Reimagined to the components of the Student Success Act, to make sure that where we can invest in PPS Reimagined, we can do that. And because as you all know, the PPS Reimagined, our vision, our North Star, comes from a broad community engagement process that garnered over 16,000 data points, right? And so I think that's important and not to miss on that, because we were really intentional about making sure that voices, all voices in our community, and in particular voices from the margins in our communities, that we targeted those voices as a priority. And then, again, and I think as we think about our engagement process, we want to make sure that these dollars, these limited dollars that we're getting, are helping us realize the PPS Reimagine. And so working with our community to prioritize some of those strategies in our student investment. And so here what you have is some initial dates for you to, for the community to know about. As you all know, we had a big walkout late last week, and but we've been in communication in our limited time that we were able to. We communicated with some of our large partners that can attract a lot of voices, a lot of communities, and so we are in conversation. Obviously, one of the areas of importance is to ensure that our staff, our frontline communities, our folks that are in the classroom and in our schools have an opportunity to share their ideas with us. We also will have, again, these are big tent community meetings that we imagine will look very similar to some of the experiences that you've had, whether it's the World Cafe or some of the ways in which we engaged in our visioning process. Again, we are still designing what this looks like, but what we can tell you is that these partners are in it with us, right? And they want to make sure that these voices, the voices of communities of color, of African American and Latino, Native American, et cetera, that they're centered in the conversation. Because again, this is not only the state's requirement, but this is really our ethos as an organization, right? We're leading with racial equity and social justice. So, as an example, the Coalition of Communities of Color, they work with 19 community-based organizations in our area. And so, how do we make sure that those folks are galvanizing the communities that they serve, right? Because they're embedded in our schools, they're working with our families, probably more than a lot, definitely a lot of us, because we're up in the 50,000 foot level, and making sure that those folks are bringing those communities as well. This doesn't exclude, I just want to make sure that it's clear that because we're partnering with the Coalition of Communities of Color, it doesn't exclude other folks from coming, right? Inviting other communities that may not be part of Latino Network, and may not be part of SEI, et cetera, et cetera. But this is, partnering with our broader community to make sure that those voices are centered. The last thing I'll say is, again, we're going to be doing some targeted approaches because, again, the state requires us to look at, and for us, we are prioritizing communities that have been historically left out of the conversation. And so we've begun to talk to the migrant ed community and some of our staff and said, how do we come to you to create a focus group, to hear from you intentionally? The same thing, we'll be reaching out to our SPED community, our SPIAC community. We've reached out to our ELL community and Head Start. And of course, as these targeted meetings and focus groups, we would love to include the board, because you hearing from these folks directly is I think what makes this for me, joyful, and is really exciting, and it really helps us truly inform, the direction of the organization and of this work. So again, these are just some initial community engagement dates, more to come. And again, I want to be clear that we are still in design mode on what this is going to look like, because again, we want to be very intentional that it amplifies those voices and ensures that that all voices, and all input gets incorporated into the decision making ahead of us.
So this is great. One thing, I'm just comparing it to the budget calendar that we're about ready to talk to, and it seems that'd be a missed opportunity if these are focused on, and I know we need to do it for the act, but this is what, 39 million plus, and then we have another $500 million that we're not going to have as rigorous conversation with the community. So I loved how it was nested at the very beginning, but it seems like if we're asking the community at these forums about a very small pot, and we have this other huge, the rest of the budget over here, how can we really leverage the community engagement and those voices that Jonathan's going to bring to the table to the bigger budget discussion, and have it overlay, instead of having all the focus just on sort of the quote new money. So I just think, it seems like a great opportunity to, and
to
the
flesh
conversations
them
are
out
happening.
together. There are also additional community meetings that are after. We're trying to do this in the month of October. There's deadlines to keep up with the state calendar of events for due dates. So as you won't be able to see the budget calendar up there.
It's like the
In-
September
in
and
the-
October. I guess the only thing, like our normal, when we have our quote budget hearings, there's, on, some years, like 10 people who show up to provide, 2 minutes of public comment. And this just seems like a much richer opportunity. So, like I say, I don't know how we take some of that and embed it into our bigger budget.
Vice Chair, so I totally agree with you, and I think Deputy Superintendent Hertz and I have had some preliminary conversations about how do we, fold some of those larger conversations. Because to your point, I mean, it's $1 billion organization. This is $39 million, and so how do we continue to incorporate those voices at different aspects of our work? So I think we're going to go back and then continue that conversation to ensure that those that we're able to embed where appropriate.
So if you look in the budget calendar, which will be our next agenda item, you'll see an October 29th meeting where we'll bring a draft forward of a strategic plan / SIP. It's really the same thing. And our multi-year business plan based on the preliminary needs assessment we've done throughout our visioning process, as well as through our survey and our community engagement sessions. So this really is aligned, and it isn't the community engagement meetings that are up here for Student Success Act are not just for the $39 million. It's for the whole pot. It's for all 3 sources of funds, as well as really the continuous improvement plan is the same thing as our strategic plan. So it really all aligns together, and until I can create, we're still building things, so I can't really show it to you, but know that when you get to the budget calendar, we're trying to integrate all the parts together, and the work that's being done in these community engagement sessions certainly will be incorporated into that strategic plan work as well.
All I can say is if you ask a parent, would you rather come talk about the strategic plan, CIP, and the multi-year business plan? Or would you rather come talk about advancing academic outcomes for diverse communities, expanding mental health and behavioral outcomes, providing equitable access? I can guarantee you'll get a totally different group of parents and a lot more community energy. So as we think about how we, so I know this is the calendar, but how we build them, about what we want people to talk about. Now, Andrew would probably
make them talk about the CIP once you get them there.
Yeah,
No, absolutely, and I think that's why for us as an initial step was to partner with some of those folks that are on the ground, that can help us really interpret what we, sometimes we get lost in our own verbiage and our own kind of things, and so how do we make sure that the folks on the ground can help us elevate those voices and bring those voices forward to us? So totally in agreement.
This
And I
list is
also-
exciting.
Yeah,
This.
it is.
Right.
But I also think that's why it's critical for us board members to be at the events that are around this community engagement, because part of our role on the board is to receive the information and the energy of the community, and then be boring like Director Scott, and translate that into what is the CBIP.
And so I think to your point, Director Lori, as we're designing this, we're going to be working with our partners that we listed on that page, but we will also be reaching out to all of you because all of you are engagement professionals yourself, whether in one way or the other as directors, and so I want to make sure that your voices help shape the process, because again, ultimately, you as the directors will have a big say in how this all ends up being sent to the state.
Can I just ask for a little clarification?
Sure.
So when I see something about a needs assessment, I think needs assessment. It's like all of it. And then you figure out where you're going to get the resources to respond to the needs. So, am I misunderstanding? Is this going to be a needs assessment for the SSA money, as little as it is? Or is this going to be a needs assessment where we talk to people about?
Sure. I think we want to. I think we want to be. Again, I think this is where we're still shaping what is going to look like. I mean, I think we want to marry the incredible work that we've done over the last year, right? 16,000 data points. If you remember, the first thing that we looked at was, Horizon 1. What are the things that are not working? What is our needs assessment, right? And so how do we make sure that we're incorporating all that data points? Because we were very intentional, right? Over 40 meetings with students, with parents, right? In small groups, big groups. And so how do we take that data as a starting point and elevate that conversation to the next level, right? And again, unlike other districts in the state, we've already done a lot of that work. And so again, what we're all contending with is how do we bring that to the conversation and then take it to the next level, right? And so I think we're still trying to figure out what that looks like, but ultimately I think the state is asking us to look at a needs assessment from the perspective of the Student Success Act.
And I just want, sorry.
That's okay. I'll listen to you first.
Well, I just want to sort of make note of the fact that we're going to need a little grace here because this is very fast.
I agree.
And, this state isn't helping by not being clear about what we're even talking about. So it's probably going to be a little raggedy. And we're gonna need community and stakeholders to understand that this is, I'm gonna have to keep it clean. This is going to be an all hands on deck, really, I can't think of any way to put it that isn't unclean. This is gonna be a really intense effort. And it's not going to be perfect, but I think we're going to try as hard as we can to get a really representative engagement. I just think we need to put that out there.
On Friday, Scott Nine, the new assistant superintendent at ODE, who's running the implementation process for Student Success Act, said, "New is hard." And I thought that was, it's not profound, but it's a good reminder. This is brand new. All of these systems, most of these things are new, and it's not going to be an easy rollout. But this is the first part, and then it will get easier as things keep going. And hopefully, we'll always have this stream. So the first little bumpy part is the hard part.
And I think we are at a huge advantage compared to the rest of the state, precisely because we went through the whole visioning thing.
Right.
So we got a big leg up here, and it's still going to be hard.
Definitely, and I think we do have a leg up, and I think we also have a leg up that we have some incredible community partners that are ready to, on Friday, the moment I gave, some of our folks a call, without hesitation, they said yes, right? They want to be involved, they want to be invested in this work, so I think we need to leverage that, right? We need to leverage the fact that our community is ready to take this conversation as an organization and as a community, right? Because we all, again, the title of the bill is the student success, right? We all want what's best for our kids. So excited.
One last thing, I just do these types of meetings for a living, and I hope that we'll be able to be really clear with the public in terms of how they can add value to the process, because it's one more meeting. If we can communicate how their input will help inform the finished product, I think that'd be really helpful. And also, I look forward to partnering with you on this. I think it is fantastic.
Definitely, and I'm excited that we do have Shanice Clark, our new director of community engagement, who comes from a grassroots organizing background. She's somewhere back there. She's back there. And to your point, that as grassroots organizers, right? We understand the value. That when we bring community together, we should have what is that value add that they're going to bring to the table. If not, don't come. Right? We're not doing public relations anymore. We're really doing authentic engagement.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think leading off with the vision work and reflecting how community input ended up in the vision and how that's influencing the strategic plan and the SSA will help reinforce that and keep that positive cycle going.
It's really just the next step of the visioning process.
Okay, we're going to transition to the next,
That's
next
the
item.
overview. That's the information we have to this point. Obviously, we all have still questions about the specifics. We don't know them yet. Hopefully, what you're hearing is that there will be opportunities for the community to weigh in. Some of those are listed, some will still to come, but we don't want to discourage anybody feeling like they can't lend their ideas because they care deeply about our public schools. And so whether it fits in this exercise for Student Success Act or it informs the bigger conversation, to Director Scott's point, around how we leverage other resources, it's all helpful. So thank you for your participation in advance.
Great, thank you. Before we move to the next agenda item, just want to note that our quarterly financial report, which traditionally we had presented at, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to present it, that we traditionally had presented at board meetings, we've made a decision that those are sent out to the board members to review. They're posted online, so if community members want to see our fourth quarter quarterly financial report, it's posted online. And with that, I'd like to ask Superintendent to introduce the next item, which relates to our budget calendar.
Deputy Hertz is on overtime, but we're bringing up a fresh set of eyes here. CFO Claire Lee. Cynthia Lay. What did I say? Cynthia Lay.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Directors, Superintendent. I am here to present to you the 2020-21 budget calendar that we normally bring to you. However, this year we added the Vision 2030, the Student Success Act, and the multi-year business plan into the budget calendar. So the meaningful conversations earlier that you all had really leading us into this calendar. This is where we developed a calendar that would incorporate the community engagement as well as a new addition to the calendar for next year. We are bringing the CBRC community members to the work sessions so that, and also to the community engagements, so they can be on the same page with the board for their decision making as well as for their support in the proposed budget that we'll be presenting in the spring of 2020. I am happy to answer any questions you have concerning this calendar.
Are there any questions by board members?
No.
Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
Yes. So, at the end of last year's process, we kicked around the idea of doing a more values-based board/community process earlier, so that when the specific budget came out, we were more checking for alignment rather than trying to do any budget micromanaging. And I don't see that reflected here. I mean, it's, the SSA is certainly a piece of that, but it kind of goes back to the point that was brought up previously about trying to integrate an overall budget input process, again, early in the cycle.
Certainly, Director Bailey and Board of Directors and Superintendent, I appreciate the question, because if you look at the calendar, you're going to see that the month of September through October, there will be community engagements, and the CBRC members are scheduled to participate in those meetings, as well as if you see on, for example, the November 18th, as well as October 29th, where I indicate the work session with CBRC. That's where you're going to see the members of the CBRC is going to show up, and they're going to learn and go through the process at the same time with the board. There are a series of meetings that they will be in work sessions with the board. Another one is on the next page that you will see on February 25th. And April 21st is when they are going to come and to listen to the superintendent deliver the budget message for 2020-21.
So I think part of your question was at the beginning of the year, So if you see the multi-year business plan woven in, this is the component that is what you're looking for in terms of how we're building a plan for multiple years, looking at what do we need for curriculum adoption, what do we need for professional development of our staff, what do we need for multiple tiers of support for our students, so that it's getting to our very specific strategies of how we're going to improve student achievement. And this will, this gets tied into the Student Success Act, helping to fund that. It's also built on our visioning coming prior. So it is that strategic plan and multi-year business plan are that components that we had talked about last spring.
So the business plan is the overall organization.
Yes, and then
operational plan, as opposed to the bond is something different, but everything outside of the bond work, basically.
So the multi-year business plan will be more, it won't go into every individual budget line, but we'll get into major themes and categories of what we're needing to do strategically in order to increase student achievement. Ties right into the Student Success Act. It's really the same work. It's not any different than that.
Does it also include operational?
There will be
items?
some operational components. There'll be some things such as when you rebuild schools in a bond, you also have a need to fund the systems that you've added to those new schools. We have not been adding funds to support those. So those are, so for instance, operational, that will be, that's a line item that you can expect will be coming forward in that business plan.
That will make a lot of us happy.
Great.
On November 18th is when the board is going to have an opportunity to review the 2020-23 the strategic plan for the multi-year business plan. So
The 18th is a Monday, so is that, that board meeting is moved to Monday then, that week?
I don't believe it's moved. The problem is that's a Thanksgiving holiday month, and it's very difficult. So I believe that's going to be a back-to-back, if I'm not mistaken.
So, okay.
Yeah.
So just to clarify that we will have two board meetings that week, one on the 18th and one on the 19th.
That was in order to meet the timeline. We had to meet the state timeline as well for the Student Success Act.
Okay, any other questions? I'm just going to echo Director Bailey's comment. I think last year we spent a huge amount of time on a very small amount of money at the very end because we didn't have that value-based conversation at the very front end. So we're all trying to cram it into that small amount of increment of money at the end. So I just want to echo that we make sure and try to build that in at the front end so we don't at the back end have that conversation.
thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Can I just ask one small question? On October 15th, it says TSCC hearing for local option levy.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
Definitely. This is by statute that when a district goes out for a local option levy, we have to have this hearing with TSCC. However, the attendance of the board members are not required. What is required is the districts, whoever has the most knowledge on this particular work, and this will be Deputy Claire Hertz, as well as Executive Chief of Staff Stephanie Beck. I think that's her name now. Yes.
Okay.
You can't keep me away from a TSCC hearing. I just
Oh,
want
I
to
hear
know
you.
for the record.
Yes.
You can try.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. At this point in time, it's for board and conference reports. Earlier this summer, the entire board and the superintendent participated in a professional development opportunity with the Council of Great City Schools. I'd like to, one of our requirements is that we have a report on our work, and I'd like to ask Director Lowry to say a few words about our participation.
So
I'm going to share a few of my thoughts about the board's participation in the Accelerated Board Capacity Summer Institute, which is a Harvard Business School executive education program. First of all, we were very fortunate to obtain spots in this first ever training institute. There were 100 board members and superintendents from 18 districts around the country, and our entire board, along with our superintendent, were all able to participate. Before we arrived in Boston, or Cambridge, we spent about 20 hours reading the case studies that ranged from things such as how a school district selected a new superintendent to a corporate board's response to a data breach, and a review of data and narrative, which led to a decision-making exercise. So fortunately, the Red Sox had won the day before. So the folks from Boston, along with Director Moore, were quite happy Sunday as we entered the classroom space. We were assigned seats in the tiered classroom, and this meant that the professors had full view of us and that we could be called upon at any time. We spent the next 4 days in class discussing case studies as a large group, in small groups discussing the homework over breakfast, and doing deep dives on the application of our learnings in the afternoons with our groups. These groups included a superintendent and board members from different districts. At lunch and dinner, we were again in different groups based on our interests and issues we wanted to learn about, including things such as budgeting, superintendent evaluations, community engagement, committee structure, and more. Our time together as a whole board was fairly limited, but we did get a chance to do some team building over a meal as we talked about things like our preferred working styles and our communication preferences. The time at Harvard was rich with learning, and the shared knowledge and concepts have already helped us in our work of goal setting, with a focus on student achievement. We have some clarity on best practices and have been reminded that we are not alone in the difficult work of governance of a large urban school district. The days were very full, and some time for reflection would have been a nice addition to the program. My hope is that at some point in the future, we will have a chance to do even more application work at a board retreat, discussing the particular learnings, such as question zero, theory of change, and our own decision-making processes that we discovered, and how these apply when we work together. Overall, this time together at the Board Capacity Institute was incredibly worthwhile for the practical knowledge we gained, the relationships with school board leaders across the country, and our own development as a team. I want to thank the leaders of the Great City Schools for creating this program, and for our leadership here in the district for arranging our participation in this wonderful opportunity. My mom is now thrilled that she can tell people her daughter went to Harvard.
Thank you, Director Lau. Is there anybody else who'd like to offer any comments about the experience? Director Bailey?
It was the last Red Sox win of this season, I think.
Not quite, but they did lose the next 10 games, and they're now only 20 and a half games back. So I think the World Series is a definite possibility.
Anything else?
But it was a great opportunity to hear from different districts, usually large metropolitan districts from around the country, and gain some perspective.
Great. Thank you for putting that report together on behalf of the board. So the next meeting of the board will be held.
Real quickly, Monday, October 21st, 6:30 in the evening at Multnomah County headquarters. The League of Women Voters is holding a forum on the local option levy that we will be voting on in November.
How will people get more information on that? Is that an opportunity for public testimony, or is it a informational?
I'm not exactly sure yet. I think there'll be, in part, a panel presentation. A couple of us will be there to present information, but I don't know the format other than that.
Okay, well, keep us posted, please. The next meeting of the board will be held October 15th, so we're going to be out of our 2-week cycle, so it'll be almost 3 weeks before our next meeting. We next are going to move to the Mazama Conference Room for a work session, both on our board goals and the internal performance audit function. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.